He's sarcastic, sharp, and surrounded by idiots. Scar is one of the best Disney villains ever created. All he wants is love, attention, power, and an army of goose-stepping hyenas. Is that too much to ask for? His voice actor isn't new to villainous roles, performing quite a few throughout his long and impressive career. But this was his first voice acting role. How did he do? Let's find out. Before we start, don't forget to check out our Discord, our coffee page, and like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell, all the things. It really helps us out. Jeremy Irons was born in Cowes, England, on the Isle of Wight. Naturally, this is where Jeremy first found himself acting.
I played, I think when I must have been about 12, in a Moor's Mystery. And I played a sort of Agatha Christie type detective who was a lady. She wore a tweed suit, a rather nice jacket and a skirt and sensible shoes. And just before I went on, the director, the mistress who was directing the play, said to me, "Don't forget to adjust your skirt before you sit down, or when you sit down." And I'd seen the older boys, and I was very envious of them, because we wore shorts. And I'd seen the older boys, before they sat down, hitching up their trousers, and they sat down. I thought it was very grown up. And I thought, oh, yeah. So every time before I sat down, I hitched up my skirt. And the audience laughed. And it was my first time of having that wonderful drug of doing something and having the audience laugh. And that was the first thing I ever remember.
An indifferent student, his teachers and family were unsure what he would do for a career. Jeremy was also unsure. I was unsure. We were all very nervous. But he felt he wanted to be away from the middle-class people he grew up with. The alternative culture at the time piqued his interest. And so, after school, he began busking and working at a church as a social worker. You go, busking boy! Jeremy had done a few plays at his boarding school and enjoyed them a lot, and so he decided to pursue acting to see how he liked it.
I found an advertisement on the back of the Stage newspaper which asked for an acting ASM down at the Marlow Theatre in Canterbury. And so I applied and I got the job. And I started working. I think I worked for about 4 or 5 months at the Marlow, and I loved the smells. I loved the smells of glue on the sides on the flats, and I liked the attitude of the actors. I loved the hours, which were sort of fairly late for me, starting at about 10 and finishing at about 2, and the fact that you were working somehow as a group, but outside society. So I thought, well, I better learn how to do this. And strangely enough, I instinctively auditioned for drama school. I could it well, because I'm quite practical. I could well have tried to get a job in the drama school as a technician, but I didn't. And most of them turned me down because I had no real reason for wanting to be an actor, and everybody came with these great CVs, and they wanted to do act since they were 2.5, and they'd all been to they'd done everything, they'd done television shows and all of this, and they said, "Why do you want to be an actor?" I said, "Oh, I don't know, I just thought it might be quite a nice way to spend my life."
Surely that's the perfect reason.
Well, I would have thought, but it didn't read well, So they all said, "Come back next year when you've had a think about it," except for one, the Bristol Old Vic, and there was a wonderful principal there called Nat Brenner, who was a man of the theatre, a socialist, and a man who'd been through every job in the theatre: actor, lighting technician, director, producer, and a wonderful, wonderful man. And he recognized something in me, and he said, "If I can get you to stand up straight, you'll look good on the edge of a stage." And so I remember my audition I was doing something from Richard II, strangely enough, which I then went on to play years later. But I remember him putting me in a half Nelson, marching me around the rehearsal room, saying, "Now go and do the speech, but stand up straight and do the speech." And I think from the end of that realized that probably I could stand up straight and I might be useful. And I had a wonderful 2 years there.
After graduation, he stayed in Bristol for 3 seasons, playing the juvenile leads in plays by Shakespeare, Noel Coward, and Joe Orton, or as I call them, my boys. In 1971, he moved to London to pursue a career in film and on the West End stage. He auditioned for everything, even the lame ones.
So I came to London, I took a little bedsit in Southwark and auditioned for everything. I hate auditioning. I was never any good at it. But I thought, I just got to practice this. So I auditioned for everything. And if the job took me, was off for Leicester or Nottingham or something, one of the reps there, I'd say, thank you very much. And if they offered it to me, which wasn't always, I'd say, sorry, I can't do it, actually. Because I knew I wanted a job in London, but I was practicing.
Jeremy's practice paid off when he won the role of John the Baptist in the original West End production of Godspell.
And despite my height, because you Americans love a chorus line like that, and it was a bit like that with me, and I knew that, because as they lined the 30 of us up, they needed 10 of us. As they lined the 30 of us up, and I could sort of look along the line, I could see the tops of everybody's heads. I sort of do this. And a voice would always say, "Stand up, Jeremy." So I knew that. But anyway, I got the job and worked on it actually for 2 years. And I think somewhere sort of months in, I was sitting there, and there's a time when one of the characters, one of the girls, sings a song, "By My Side," I think it's called. And Jesus sits there, and Judas sits there, and I thought, I was sort of thinking, as you do, about other things. I thought, I quite like this job. It's sort of, I didn't think much about doing it. I just thought I'd give it a try. But I quite like it, and I think it quite likes me. I think I got something a bit original to offer. So I think this is good. But nevertheless, I gave myself till I was 30, because I didn't want to be an unsuccessful actor. There's nothing worse.
Yes, I guess you could say it's all for the best. Just a little joke for the Godspell heads out there. With the success of Godspell under his belt, Jeremy sought to take his career one step further.
I was seeing my name up in lights, which is very flattering, but I knew that no one was coming because I was in it, because nobody knew who I was. And I thought, I have to address this. And I was trying to make films, but nobody wanted to cast me. They were casting an actor called Simon Ward for all the parts that I would have been right for. He played young Churchill, you might remember. It was much better looking than me and had experience. And so, what?
A grumbling of dissent, I believe, from the ladies and
anyway, they wouldn't look at me. Doing a play in Greenwich about Edouard Manet, and a friend of mine, actually a friend of my wife's really at that time, George Howard, who owns a great pile up north called Castle Howard, and he came to see the show, and we were sitting having a drink afterwards, and he said, "Have you ever read Brideshead Revisited?" And I said, "No, I haven't. Evelyn Waugh, isn't it?" I said, "No, haven't read it." He said, "Well, you should, because Granada Television," which I don't think exists anymore, do they, Granada?
I don't think it does.
No, well, it's a Manchester-based fantastic television company. They are planning to make a series of the book, and there's a great part in it called Sebastian Flight that you'd be dead right for. So I thought, oh, great, I'll read it, and I read it. And I got in touch with Granada. I wrote them a letter saying, "I gather you're going to do Brideshead Revisited. I'd love to be in it in some way." And I got a letter back saying, "We haven't got a director yet, but we'll be in touch." They got in touch and said, "Well, we'd love you to do something, come and meet us." And I went and met, and they said, "Will you do Sebastian?" I said, "No, I want to do Charles." And they got in a bit of a fuss about that. But eventually, they found someone to play Sebastian, Anthony Andrews, who did it magnificently. And I had a very happy 18 months, except for after 5 months, we had a strike at Granada, a technician strike. So everything stopped. And I had promised a wonderful director now dead called Carol Rice that I would, eventually I'd been asked to play this part in a film called The French Tennis Woman opposite Meryl Streep. And he said, I'd love you to play it. And he was dead right, because I was very good casting. I said, but the studios won't let you cast me because I'm not a star. He said, well, leave it with me. And he called me during the first 5 months of Brideshead and said, you've got the role. I've got my star. I've got Meryl Streep, so I can have you. And I said, oh, well, that's great. So anyway, when we had the strike, and we had a layoff for about 3 months, I think, and then the producer, Derek Granger, called me and said, can you start again in whatever it was, February? I think we'd stopped in November. And I said, well, I can, but I have promised Carol Rice that I will do this film for him. And I think we were going to shoot in late March, April or something. And he said, oh, no, that'll be all fine. We can work that out. Will you come back to Brideshead? So I said, yeah. Well, when the time came to work it out, I got a rather heavy message from the television company saying, I'm sorry, we can't release you. We need to work through that period. And a lot of people were, involved in that. And I thought, wait a minute, I have a contract. No, I don't have a contract. I actually hadn't signed a contract. But I have a verbal contract with my producer. He understood what I'd said. So I went to see a lawyer. We were filming up north. I came down to London. And it was good. It was silk. And he said, you'd win if what you tell me is true. But it would take 1.5 years to come to court. I said, well, that's hopeless, isn't it? I mean, we'll be finished by then. The film would have gone. So I went back north to work, leaving an agent in tears in London. And after one day's work, went back to my hotel room and thought, you're being very British about this, Jeremy. You're 30. If you're going to make it in this life, you're going to make it in your 30s. And you think you're right, and you're stepping down because you've been told you can't win in court. If that's the way you're going to manage your life, then fine, but don't expect too much. So I sat down, I had a couple of martinis and dinner, and then returned to my room and wrote a long letter to the chairman of the television company, telling him that I was off, unless by 6 o'clock the following day, he would agree to release me to make this film. And I laid out, I knew everything he could do to me. I said, I know you can bar me from the union, I know you can sue me. They by then spent 8 million, I think. I said, my house is worth 85,000, that's about all I have, but you can sue me for that. I'm not an hysterical actor, I'm just an actor against the wall, and that is, I called my lawyer first thing in the morning and read it over the phone to him and said, that's what I want to send. He said, if you're absolutely sure, you seem to know the downside. I said, yeah. He said, all right, I will fax it to me and I'll have it delivered round, which he did. By 6 o'clock that day, there'd been no response. So, having checked with my producer whether there'd been any response, and he said, no, there hadn't. I got in my car, drove down to London, went out to a film premiere. The following day, I was fairly shaky, because walking off a set in this country is a big thing. I think in America too. And a lot of people were beholden to me. I was a big cast, big crew, all of this. And I was gone, and I was in every scene, bar, I think, 2 weeks. I went to lunch with my agent in a restaurant. There was a phone call during lunch from the chairman of the television company who said, will you come for tea? I said, yeah. I asked my agent for a Valium, went to walk the dog on Hampstead Heath, and then went down to have tea with the chairman of Granada, who was very cross, said he felt let down. I said, I feel let down. We're both in the same boat. He said, if I can work something out, will you go back to work? I said, certainly, I'll be back there tomorrow morning. He left the room for about 15 minutes, came back in and said, I'll work this out in 3 weeks, give me 3 weeks. So I went back to work. 3 weeks later, they tied the two things together, the film and the television, so that the film paid for the downtime of the television and the television invested in the film. And I was able to do both. But on the journey down, the night before, when I'd driven down in my Volkswagen Beetle, long drive on the M6, about 4-hour drive, I remember thinking, that's it, that is it. Now, if I'm not going to act, what am I going to do? I could be an agent, but should I write? well, can I write? I don't know. But I knew that was it. And I knew that I had taken my destiny in my hand in a way that I had never felt before. And I think that's when I grew up. I knew I was my own man. I could do anything.
Brideshead Revisited released in 1981. Here he played the leading role Charles Ryder in a magnificent performance that brought Jeremy a lot of attention. However, The French Lieutenant's Woman also premiered in 1981, in which he had the pleasure of playing opposite our queen, Meryl Streep.
It was unworthy. I suddenly saw after you had gone that I had to destroy what had begun between us.
Are you saying that you never loved me?
I could not say that.
But you must say that. You must say I am totally evil. I used him as an instrument. That I do not care that in all this time he hasn't seen a woman to compare with me. That his life has been a desert without me. That he has sacrificed everything for me. Say it!
These two projects launched an already promising career into the stratosphere and delivered Jeremy directly into the limelight with plenty of offers to choose from. Throughout the 1980s, Irons continued to work on stage, undertaking classical roles with the Royal Shakespeare Company. He debuted on Broadway in 1984 playing opposite yet another queen, Glenn Close, in The Real Thing by Tom Stoppard. His performance in that play won him a Tony Award for Best Actor. Irons and Close worked together again in Reversal of Fortune, the film for which Irons won a Best Actor Oscar.
I'm not a hired gun. I gotta feel there's some moral or constitutional issue at stake.
But I am absolutely innocent, and my civil liberties have been egregiously violated.
I've got two black kids facing the electric chair for a crime they did not commit. They are innocent.
Well, before you assume I'm guilty, won't you hear my story?
No. Never let defendants explain. Puts most of them in an awkward position.
How do you mean?
Lying.
But I give you my word as a gentleman.
Oh. No.
His other notable film roles include The Mission, Dead Ringers, Swan in Love, Die Hard with a Vengeance, The Man in the Iron Mask, Lolita, and The Man Who Knew Infinity.
Because I have to. I see it.
Like oil, form for its own sake, an art unto itself. And like all art, it reflects truth. It's the only truth I know. It's my church. And you, just as Mozart could hear an entire symphony in his head, you dance with numbers to infinity. But this dance, this art, does little to endear us to certain factions who see us as mere conjurers. So if we are going to challenge areas of mathematics that are so well trod, we cannot afford to be wrong.
Talk about a silver fox of the silver screen. But enough about this. So now for the main attraction, which was surprisingly hard to learn about. Much like our third queen of the show, Angela Lansbury, Jeremy Irons has achieved so much, his excellent performance is just a drop in the bucket, and so I couldn't find much in the way of his opinions. The man has a lot going on, okay? Still, here's what I could learn. First of all, Scar seems to have always been considered with an English accent. Actors Tim Curry, Malcolm McDowell, Alan Rickman, Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen were considered for the role. As we all know, Jeremy won the role. Still, he initially turned it down because he felt uncomfortable going to a comedic role after his dramatic portrayal of Klaus von Bülow in Reversal of Fortune, 1990. Hard to flip a coin like that. Two sides. I feel ya, Jer Bear.
You're a very strange man.
You have no idea.
His performance in this film inspired the writers to incorporate more of his acting as von Bülow in the script.
Hey, Uncle Scar, when I'm king, what'll that make you?
A monkey's uncle.
You're so weird.
You have no idea.
Andreas Deja also watched Reversal of Fortune and Damage, so he could use Irons' facial traits and tics in the animation. A very drawable face, in my opinion.
Simba, what have you done?
There were wildebeest and you tried to save me. It was an accident. I didn't mean for it to happen.
Of course you didn't. No one ever means for these things to happen. But the king is dead. And if it weren't for you, he'd still be alive. What will your mother think?
What am I gonna do?
Run away, Simba. Run. Run away and never return.
Extraordinary. I mean, I'd never made a voice for Disney before, and I was working in Stratford at the Shakespeare Company at the time when they asked, and I thought, oh well, I'm put on a voice to a cartoon. Oh well, okay, it pays all right, well, reasonably well. Disney, of course, never pays proper money, but I said, yeah, all right. And I went along expecting to see the finished film and me having to sort of put lines into mouths that were moving in a certain way. But it's not like that at all. You sit there with a script. They've got a storyboard around the room, so you sort of see the story that's going to happen, but very roughly painted. And then they give you the script, and you try a bit of that, and then you play around with it, and you alter stuff, and you come up with stuff, and you suggest stuff. And meanwhile, there are people videoing you with a camera and drawing you. Artists drawing you and all of this, and you're playing around, and then 2 months later you meet again, wherever you are, in Toronto or whatever, they'll come to you there, the whole team comes, and they've got a little bit more worked out, and they've played with the script a bit more, and you put some other stuff on tape, and this girl, I suppose I met them about 6 times over a year, then they come up with a film. And of course I was absolutely devastated because, they've been videoing me and drawing me for all that time. And I see the film and there's this scrawny bloody lion. And I look at James Earl Jones, who's black, for God's sake. I look at James Earl Jones and he's golden and big mane. James Earl Jones is bald. Big mane, he ripples. And I thought, what's the matter with me? Why have I got to look like that? And a tail that looks as if, people have been pulling hair out of it for 100 years. I was very, very hurt.
Right.
And then I went to see it at Radio City Music Hall when we opened it. And when there's a moment at the end, I haven't seen it for years, but I seem to remember there's a moment at the end where he's hanging onto the cliff. And they eventually push him off. And as they pushed him off, the whole audience stood up, bar one, and roared. Stood up and roared. And I thought, he wasn't that bad. I was the only person sitting there watching them all, roaring with clapping. So hurtful.
Despite his enormous success in film, Irons remained active in the theater, television, and the recording studio. He portrayed Professor Henry Higgins in a 1997 recording of My Fair Lady. In 2003, he starred in a New York revival of Stephen Sondheim's A Little Night Music. He returned to the London stage in 2006 after an absence of nearly 20 years to star in Embers. He received a second Emmy Award and a second Golden Globe in 2007 for his performance as Sir Robert Dudley in the television miniseries Elizabeth I. Because my man has range.
How is your wife, my lord? Is she well?
Your wife, Robin?
I understood that you and Lady Essex are married and that she carries your child.
Oh, you son of a whore.
Your Majesty, you must know that...
Know what, my lord?
That I would never have taken a wife if there were but a chance you would smile upon my suit.
Irons played the British Prime Minister Sir Harold Macmillan in the play Never So Good by Howard Bretton for Britain's National Theatre in 2008. The following year, he returned to Broadway to star with actress Joan Allen in the new play Impressionism by Michael Jacobs. From 2011 to 2013, Jeremy Irons starred as Pope Alexander VI in the Showtime historical series The Borgias. So I think we should just make him a real king now. He's done it enough times. He's more of a king than Scar, that's for sure. And he was 10 times the King Mufasa was.
Stick with me, and you'll never go hungry again!
Most recently, he has played Ozymandias in HBO's Watchmen TV series, and Alfred in the most recent iteration of the DC Universe. Obviously, he has done a lot more than that, but we're running out of time as usual, and he hasn't done anything more for Disney. Irons is an amazing actor, with quite profound views on the world. In fact, he's much like an animator, watching people from the sidelines and taking notes for his performances. And with so many impressive acting credits, he truly is film and theater royalty. So long live the king! Oops. Poor choice of words. How about just huzzah? Thank you to these people for supporting us on Patreon and Ko-fi. And if you want to make sure this channel sticks around, you can check out our Ko-fi link in the description. Every bit helps. Thank you for watching this episode of Discographies. Click the thumbs up button below if you liked it. And if you want to be notified when the next episode comes out, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. Comment below with characters you would like to see us cover. Further reading and references are linked below. We hope to see you in another Discography.